We are, of course, a UK politics channel, but sometimes I think there are events that happen in other countries that do deserve at least some spotlight because there are a lot of things we can learn from things that go on in other countries. And not only good things that we should be sort of borrowing and thinking, hey, that's a really good policy idea. Why not just bring it over here? Or in the case of what is certainly going on in Italy, certainly a message not only to the left here in the UK, but progressives as a whole here in the UK. Because there are a lot of people who consider themselves to be very, very much progressive. But I do really worry that at the next general election, Labour needs to be bold. It needs to offer a real good alternative to what the Conservatives have been offering. And the thing is, there are a ton of really, really good progressive ideas that Labour can be putting forward. And Rebecca Long Bailey said something very similar today. And I do understand the criticisms of again, we've said this before about putting out a manifesto, but to be honest, I think Labour shouldn't put out like a full manifesto, but like a partial manifesto saying we are going to do this, this, and this. And here's the thing. So if, let's say, the Conservatives start borrowing your policies, well, then call them out for it. Call them out on it and stuff like that. So I am echoing, and again, Ed Miliband has said this as well. We have to be brave. We have to push forward our policies and not be scared of them. And Starmer's doing a speech today about the economy. We may cover it probably tomorrow or something like that when he's when he's done it. We'll see what he's had to say. But certainly he was on a podcast. I think it was with Rory Stewart the other day, saying, "Look, the UK could be heading for a 10-year recession. If you get in, how do you sort of solve these things?" And sort of his response was sort of quite interesting. Like I say, go watch it. I think it's The Rest is Politics, I think. So it's Rory Stewart and Alistair Campbell's podcast that they have. Very good. Go give it a listen. Definitely give it a recommend. Tell them Bowler Hat Man sent you. But yeah, we're going to go over this that's happening in Italy because this is sort of very, very much a warning and very, very much so something we need to be paying attention to, because in Italy, you are seeing the rise even more so of the far right over there in Italy. And of course, it is very worrying to see that they are gaining as they may be such a good ground. But you've had a sort of a progressive candidate who has sort of been mirroring the Starmer of the slow and steady centrism, but he's, well, been booted out. So we're going to go over on this article about this because I think this is quite interesting and certainly does bear a certain, definitely a warning to us over here. So before we go diving into this, please do remember to hit the like and share button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a motivation link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can, well, buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much to all those people who do help support the channel that way. So over on to here. This is coming from The Guardian. With the title of Italy's Loss of Mario Draghi, is a warning to progressives across Europe and to the EU. In a summer overshadowed by war in Europe, a pandemic, an energy and cost of living crisis, and climate chaos, Italy has decided to follow the UK and trigger a government collapse. Mario Draghi, the internationally admired and former head of the European Central Bank, was never elected, but was called upon back in 2021 to lead a temporary government of national unity. And that unity ended last week. Other European leaders are dismayed. Many Italians are incredulous. The Draghi cabinet achieved constantly high approval ratings, and while Britain at least looked destined for a modicum of continuity as it switches conservative leaders, Italy, after a year and a half of apparent political stability, is now heading for a September election where hard right parties, including the post fascist Brothers of Italy party, top the polls, which again, very worrying. The immediate culprits for this collapse of the Draghi's administration are easy to identify. His coalition partners, the anti-establishment Five Star Movement, the far-right League led by Matteo Salvini, and the Silvano Berlusconi's Forza Italia, decided to boycott a confidence vote on a package of measures to ease the cost of living crisis. And yet, the problem is not so much that these parties are selfish and irresponsible for collapsing the plans. Of course, they are. The problem is that the top-down government by technocrats does not work in the first place, and Italian progressives have failed to craft a viable alternative to the right. Just blaming Five Star or the League is a self-absolving narrative that risks becoming an alibi for further inaction. And we've seen that, by the way, in Labour. We've seen people just go, oh, it's the Labour right who were the problem. When, look, you look at the polling from 2019, there were problems with Corbyn that Corbyn must have known about, and so must have his team must have known about, and that they did nothing to solve. And I've always said Corbyn never, ever played the PR game. And yet there are a lot of people out there who treat Corbyn like he's the second coming of Jesus Christ. And don't get me wrong, Corbyn would have been, a good prime minister, someone I would have definitely wanted to see in, BPM. But, parties have to live beyond just one person. And I think that's where you see this obsession come from. And I know that he's announced, I think he's being asked to run for sort of mayor of London. So again, I've got no problem with him running for mayor of London. I think he'd make probably quite a good mayor of London. But you cannot just pin all your hopes on one individual. We are a political party. You are not voting for a president. You are voting for a party. And it is important what that party stands for. So just because there's someone like Keir Starmer, is sort of the party leader, do not be put off. For Christ's sake, and if you are annoyed of like Labour's inaction, join the Labour Party. Start pushing for progressive policies. That's what I've done. That's what I do. So anyway, back to you. Here we are. So Draghi's international prestige is also no excuse for ignoring the shortfalls of his technocratic approach. Italy was always constitutionally required to have parliamentary elections by next spring. Ahead of that, it is only natural that political parties have coasted artificially to form a government to relaunch the economy, and the post-pandemic would begin to raise their voices to establish distinctive identities with the electorate. This is how democratic politics functions. Parties represent different worldviews, and the electorate wants to be aware of the differences. Draghi brought down on his own downfall, understandably, by ultimately defining that he refused to yield to the pressure and hand over the symbolic wins to members of his coalition. Such compromise is what politics is made of. Witness Germany's current governing coalition, which agreed to lower the price of gas to please the free market liberals and ensure that most free public transport to allow the Greens to also claim a victory. Brushing that aside, the differences between the parties is no way to guarantee the stability of a system. It only places a lid on a simmering water until that pot inevitably boils over. Such explosions in democracies are called elections. But why is the prospect of an election in Italy right now so worrying? Well, the irresponsible actions of the Five Star or even the League should not give Italy's progressives a free pass. They have failed to provide a realistic alternative to either the unelected technocracy or the hard right backlash against it. If such an alternative existed, the prospect of early elections would not be as threatening as it seems, and international commentators would not have to urge Di Bari to give at least 6 more months, however desirable that seems. It is often too overlooked that while the Italian right has more or less a stable coalition of 3 parties, the progressives field includes at least 3 Liberal parties, the left-leaning Democratic Party, the anti-establishment Five Star, the 3 or 4 left Green parties, the rations between them, and of course are far more stable. And of course, many of the centrist parties have placed a veto on any coalition with Five Star, which has responded in kind, while several of the left parties would not join with the Liberals, or at least even some of the Democrats. This childish game of reciprocal vetoes has kept Italy's progressives out of power. Errol Latani, again, such a valid lesson here that all these progressive parties, if they work together, could have a progressive party. And that is what we are seeing at the moment, because there are a lot of people on the Labour left who are refusing or will not even stomach voting Labour at the next election because of Keir Starmer. And yet, if you want to get rid of the Tory government, you have to vote Labour. And obviously, if we're going to go for a coalition, which again, we don't know, it's very likely to be sort of an informal coalition, you're going to have to go vote Lib Dems. And as I've said to a lot of people, if you really hate, the Tories, how can you sort of bring yourself to vote for the Liberal Democrats when very, very often they are more marching in lockstep with the Tories on a lot of their policies and positions than Labour is? You have to work together with other people in your party, with their different groups. And that means you have to compromise. That means if you want to give them a win, then ask back for return. Hey, if we're letting you have this, give us something back in return. That is what you have to do. Political parties have to work together. It is so goddamn important, because you have that situation there, which we've just said. All those different left-leaning parties, from the Greens, the Progressives, basically refusing to work together. And it's childish. And you are seeing the exact same thing happen in Labour. But anyway. Akira Letta, the leader of the Democratic Party and former Prime Minister, has also put a painstaking work to create a new broad front with a realistic chance of beating the hard right in the elections. His aspirations have all but gone out the window. The weakness of Italian progressives is a chronic problem for Italy, as well as Europe. A hard right administration in Italy would weaken the EU at a crucial time of geopolitical confrontation. It would empower Eurosceptic leaders such as Viktor Orban, or hopefuls such as Marine Le Pen, weaken the consensus on Russia, and impede even deeper political integration with the ambitious common policies on defense or even energy. And yet again, we should refrain from using the Italian right as a cover for European inaction. With Draghi previously hailed as the savior of Europe and power in Rome, the pro-European administrations in Germany, France, and the EU as a whole have struggled to work together in key areas despite the converging crises. The EU governments have not, for example, taken on board the demands of the recent Conference of the Future of Europe, which included a removal of a unanimous veto, the practice that stalls most EU decision-making, or being able to construct a common defense and energy policies despite the clear and urgent need for both. The morning and the end of the internationally respected government in Italy should not make us forget these facts. Italian progressives need to build a serious alternative to the right, and the EU needs to become a true political actor with ambitious common policies for the sake of all its citizens. A hard right government in Italy means even less conducive environment for progressives on either. But let's not fool ourselves. None of this was happening while Draghi was in government. The silver lining is that none of this is made impossible by Draghi losing power. So ultimately, yes, this is probably a very worrying time for a lot of people in Italy. Certainly, absolutely, I can see that 100%. But I think the real lesson to take away from this is, if you are a progressive, then you should be working with other people in your party, even if they are on the quote Labour right, which again makes them sound like they are right wing, but they're not. They're just sort of slightly more to the right of you. There's still sort of people on the left. And there are common ground that we can agree on. There is stuff that we can do. So do not play this childish game of politics where I'm not going to vote for Keir Starmer because of whatever childish reason you can come up with. Because, quite frankly, at the next election, if you really want to keep the Tories out of power, and trust me, we really do want to keep the Tories out of power at the next general election, then you have to work with people from across your party. And that will mean you getting out and voting for Labour. And if you want more progressive policies, then push the Labour Party to adopt more progressive policies. And that seems to be lost on a lot of people on the left in the UK, which is more and more shocking. The more and more I've done this, the more and more I've realized that. But yeah, as always, I think a very worrying time for Italy. Like I say, we'll have to see how sort of these elections go over there. Hopefully, of course, they don't end up with a hard right government, because that's not going to be sort of very good for Italy. Like I say, you want a clear example of what the economy hasn't fared, shall we say, too well. And these other far right governments that have ended up getting in fact, all they've gone and done is sort of blamed immigrants, the traditional good one. And then, of course, they've blamed all their failings on everyone but their own government. Like I say, definitely a warning to the rest of Europe and to progressives across, not only here in the UK, but across the whole of Europe. So with that, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there is a link to my Patreon page and a one-off link called Buy Me Coffee, where you can buy me coffee. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all next time.